Okay, so we had a good question from a viewer, and the question was, why do addicts do what they do when it makes no sense? So this is coming from somebody who's not in recovery from drug or alcohol addiction, who's asking from the outside, maybe a family member or maybe a friend or maybe the person's got children that's on drugs or alcohol. And the question is, why do addicts do what they do when it makes no sense? And I thought it was a really, really good topip.
Good question.
And
Because it
so
doesn't make sense, right?
I got a couple of ideas. So you got anything on that?
Well, I can just tell you personally. So the worst part about my addiction, I can remember the first substance I ever came across when I was 13. I loved it. You know what I mean? Like I was like, man, this is really great. But I had no idea that could actually control your life to the point to where you'll throw everything else away for it. And I guess at my age now, and I have 3 kids that are like young adults, which is crazy. And you start looking back at some of the behaviors. This is what I'll tell you. Is like, as a father that's an addict, I had a full-time job, and so I guess it would be what you would call quote unquote functioning, which I don't like to use that word. We know nobody really is a functioning addict, but it just the depths of it hadn't really been shown yet. But I can remember one time, my youngest son asked me to go shoot basketball, and I was like, man, I don't want to go. And the thing about it, Dads, is that your son will ask you for the last time one day. And that exact same day, really pretty soon after that, guess what I got a text about? I got a text about drugs where I'd already told my son, hey, I don't feel like it. I don't feel good, son. I can't go. Of course, I would do it 1,000 times today, but then, you don't. And so you get that text message, and then boom, like all of a sudden, Dad feels great, and Dad is gone. And, it's not just this one instance. It's that over and over and over. And my wife, the tears that to try to reach me, like we're 3 o'clock in the morning. The thing is, it's whatever, when that pops off, I'm at the mercy of whoever it is and whatever they have. I'm going to wherever I have to go to get whatever
to get
I
the
need.
fix and get what you need.
Yeah, and it's only through the grace of God that I still am married. But I lost my job over that because everybody knows but you. And then I know I made plans with my father, and I can tell you specific instances where we made plans and then I just ghosted him. And to him, I don't think, it just doesn't make any sense. Like it's your family at the end of the day, that's what you have, and that's who you end up forsaking for your addiction.
Yeah,
and
the ones that care about you the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And the willingness to completely isolate from the people that really love you and need you in their life, but the willing to absolutely cut them out to do whatever it is that you've got to do. It's terrible.
That was one thing I wrote down, and we didn't know we were going to share that same thing, but I wrote down lying.
Yeah.
Because that is what you're describing there is when the addict, the alcoholic, or the drug addict, or both, or what have you, it's this web of lies that you've got to keep creating so people don't find out what you're doing, so they don't talk to you about what you're doing, so they don't interfere with what you're doing. Drugs and alcohol is working so good for you, you think that you don't want anything to interrupt it. You don't want anything to interfere with it. You don't want speeches or lectures or guilt trips or motivational quotes about it. You want to live in this world, which is usually chaos. But
100%.
But those drugs and alcohol, you're just medicating whatever is going on in your head and your life, and then you're upset about being a drunk and an alcoholic, and then you drink or use more drugs because you feel like a loser and a deadbeat and nothing works out right, and so they call it this merry-go-round.
It is.
And you're just going to stay on that merry-go-round until you eventually have to jump off of it.
You love it. You don't know it's miserable at the time. You look back and you think, man, that was pretty terrible, but that's what you do.
Yeah.
Another thing, like I asked my wife, I'm like, so what are some of my behaviors that just didn't make sense to you? And one of it, she said, were like mood swings. And so the swing of an addict is
super high, super low.
So I have a pocket full of pills, man. I'm great. Let's go do some stuff. And it's, the down part wouldn't come when I would run out. The down part would come when I was like low, not out, but low. And I didn't have any prospects on the horizon to re-up. And yeah, it would I would just shut down physically and emotionally. It's crazy. Not like I did it on my own. I think there's a huge psychological tie to it.
I thought about that earlier about all the domestic dispute calls police must get when
Bunches,
drugs and
yeah.
alcohol are just probably involved in well over half of those.
And you think about, like, how do you even respond to that? I guess domestic violence calls are the most dangerous, from what I understand. I can't quote a stat on that, but they know they need help, but they don't want the cops to beat up their old man or the old lady,
Yeah.
or take them to jail. It's
Yeah.
tough. That's a tough deal on the cops, I believe.
I think it's one of the worst calls, Yeah, because they're afraid for their life and they're trying to intervene in something, and then oh my God, I think those can go really south really
Quickly,
quick.
you're right.
But I looked up something on a website called the American Society of Addiction and Medicine, and I thought about, so why do addicts do the things they do when it doesn't make sense to a non-user, to the normal people, to the normal people in their family? And we discovered that there's two ways to look at it. There are two things happening. There's something happened from a biochemical standpoint that you're messing up, and then there's something happened spiritually as well. So it's both in the natural and spiritual that two things are taking place very damaging to the addict. But the American Society of Addiction and Medicine defines addiction as a disease affecting brain chemistry and circuitry, which leads to compulsive drug seeking and using behaviors.
Which is uncontrollable.
Yeah.
Largely.
And when they say disease, people that are non-addicts, like, oh, it's not a disease, man. You guys need help. You need to control it. I think when they use the word disease, not like, oh, I caught lung cancer. That's kind of something possibly out of my control.
Yeah, right.
But what if it was a disease that I knew was bad? I knew taking X, Y, and Z would destroy me, and I'm going to continue to take it. And I have the side effects from it. I have the impact from it. That disease. Now I've got the disease. So I think when they use the word disease, it's not like the disease like, yeah, I caught the flu last weekend.
Right.
Well,
No,
it's beyond your control. I think it's a disease in the sense of you are willingly taking on things that's going to damage your body and your life. And also the disease, I think it's a disease of the mind too.
I think it is 100% mental.
A disease of the mind where you're a good person. You're not, but there's a part of you mentally or emotionally or spiritually where you're sick, and you're sick with the addiction. You get sick with it. And it further stated that the drugs impact brain chemicals and circuitry, which lead to drug dependence and then drug withdrawal symptoms when the drugs leave the body.
I've crapped my brains out a bunch.
And it listed all of the natural chemicals that are in our body that work for our good. And then when you start using drugs and alcohol, you get the enhanced effect of the things that are inside of us. It just shoots it up times 100. And so then your brain naturally is going to get addicted to the new sensories and the new things that you're introducing to the body, regardless of how damaging it is.
You're right. You don't realize the damage that you're doing. And for me, I was like, man, I didn't realize I could feel like this. Let's feel like this all the time, but it's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible. Tolerance is what gets you. It's what kills people. You build up a tolerance where, 1 cup of coffee doesn't wake you up the same way as it used to. So now you're drinking 12 cups of coffee.
Yeah.
And with 12 cups of coffee come a ton of terrible impacts on the body. It's terrible. It's terrible. And it compounds.
Yep. And it mentioned here something about it. It talked about the drug and alcohol use, and it even stated that the drug and alcohol use, I mean, we know this, but to hear it from, to read it from like a medicine journal, you know what I mean? It kind of like carries weight on it. Like we know this stuff, but when you read it from like a study of science and medicine, and it says it's the gradual use of drugs and alcohol. So although it will affect you immediately, like a person could drink one time and you would feel the narcotic effect of that alcohol or drugs. You would feel that because it's working. It will work your first time and it will work your 100th time.
Yep.
Addiction is formed somewhere in the beginning and the middle through progressive use.
You got, like, my wife. She's done things and she hates it. Like, hates it. She never wants to feel that way. And I'm thinking, man, I always want to feel this way. What's the difference? What's the difference in those two people? One person like, man, yeah, I want to feel like this all the time. The other person says, I hate this. I never want to feel like this, ever. You just never know how you're going to respond to that stuff.
Yeah, I wonder. That's a good question. I wonder, she may not have, I don't know. I think if a drug was I think if you introduced any one drug to any one person, there's got to be some sort of drug that they would respond and latch onto. That's good that she hasn't experienced anything that's that's been the outcome.
Nothing at all.
I thought of another stance on that as well, is why users do the things they do that doesn't make sense to non-users. So from a medical and natural scientific point, we're damaging our brain.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just long story short, you're doing damage to your brain and some things in your body, some of which are not reversible. Parts of you don't get back, and so you're not thinking straight. You're not thinking normally, and you can be functional and doing a lot of normal things, and but even me, just years ago, when being in a professional role, having to make some decisions, and then every now and then there's a decision that's being made that I look back now and I was like, I would never think that was a good idea. Not even
Not today.
no way possible. And it may or may not be related to work, but it was just like, wow, that is clearly, now looking back years ago, that's clearly the work of drugs and alcohol that made that decision.
Yeah.
That doesn't even make sense. And so number
That's a good
one,
point.
you're not thinking clearly because you're damaging stuff in your brain. And number two, spiritually, you're not thinking clearly as well. And the example that I thought about was the prodigal son story in the Bible. And it is in the book of Luke, chapter 15. And it is the story, Jesus is telling a story about the prodigal son that left his father, left his farm, left his family, had everything great, had everything going well for him. Everything was perfect.
Well, what he did is he asked for his inheritance early.
Yeah. Basically, like he wanted to cash, instead of being passed on these great things, I want it all now, and I want to go and I want to live. Some versions of the Bible talk about, basically it just summarizes, he wants to live a life of debauchery,
Yeah, that's it.
a life of sin, no
Cocaine and
boundaries.
hookers. That's, I mean, seriously.
Yeah, that one guy that says that from that movie. Yeah, cocaine and hookers, and that's the life he wanted to live.
Yep.
And he's leaving a life much like a lot of people do in addiction and recovery. You've got a decent home.
Good point.
You got a decent family. You probably have a decent job. I mean, things are going okay. You may not be a millionaire, but things are decent compared to some less unfortunate folks. But yet, there's something in you that you're easily swayed to this direction, and you may even be in church and you just see somebody and they just go so far off the path. And this guy did this in this story, and he blows all of his money on living a life of debauchery, women and drugs, or whatever it was for them back then. And he lost all of his money, and still at that point, he didn't return home and beg for mercy. He stayed outside of the state where he was living in, stayed in that area, blew all of his money, and got a job as a pig farmer.
Yep.
The lowest employee of the pig farmers, his job was to clean the pig
He
pens.
was shelving dookie.
And that's the lowest job of being those are all low jobs, and he is the rock bottom of that low job. And the verse in chapter 17 says, when he came to himself, another version says, when he came to his senses, he returned back home. And I'm thinking from a spiritual standpoint that those of us that were in addiction and those that are away from God in general, you've not came to your senses yet. You're almost under a spell, if you will.
100%. Demonic spell.
Exactly. You are absolutely under a spell, and people can talk to you, they can lecture you, and all of those are important seeds if done with the right heart.
I think in some ways it can even harden you.
It can.
But anyways, go ahead.
It can, but I think people should still do their part to at least get it off their chest or what have you. And so I think for those of us in alcohol and drug addiction, or at one time, you're not thinking straight either. And so from a natural standpoint and a spiritual standpoint, like I said, drugs and alcohol just makes you the worst version of yourself possible. So from the outside,
in your mind, you think it's the best version initially.
Yeah.
But it's opposite.
To you, you're doing okay. You're not drinking that much. You're not missing that much work. You've only gotten 1 or 2 speeding tickets or close calls.
I'm doing good here.
Denial, the level of delusion and denial. So for those of us that lied to our families, abused our families, stole from them, criminal charges, and I'm just speaking for all of us in recovery, we did not mean to really do that. I think everybody at their core, not everybody, but most everybody is at their very core somewhere is a good person. But when you're in addiction and you have to do everything possible to keep getting your fix.
Yeah, you are focused on getting high. The Bible says none are righteous, none. Like there are no good people without Christ.
Without Christ.
Yeah, that's my thought. Of course, again, that's personal. But I've often thought like, how do parents deal with kids in addiction? I'm talking about young kids. Let's say kids that get addict in the home. They turn to addiction in the home with their parents. How do parents deal with that? And then for our instance, we were adults. And how do parents deal with that? I don't know. I don't know how you deal with it. I hope I never have to learn, but it's got to be difficult.
Yeah.
To not know. To not know.
Yeah, it's got to be hard. And I don't wish that on anybody. And fortunately, I was bad, but I didn't get like, living in the street bad, nothing like that. It could go that direction.
Like that. It's only by the grace of God, any addict is. I drive to work. I work in South Cleveland, and I work third shift, and I'm normally at work at 10. But so one of the things about working in South Cleveland at night is that you see a ton of homeless people. Dude, I cry my eyes out because they're no different than I am, other than God's grace has taken care of me. I think one of the leading causes of homelessness is catastrophic loss of life. So their support system's gone. They don't know what to do. Almost like the prodigal son. He had all this money, he runs out of money, he can't get high anymore. His support system's gone. He's got to do the best he can, and his skills are what? Oh, you can shovel poop. Like that's all you can do. Where at his father's house, man, his father had to be fairly wealthy, he lived well. He's like, man, the servants at my dad's house live better than this. My dad's servants live better than this. I'm going home. And this dude starts back the journey. And the coolest part of the father, and take this to heart, the father doesn't pursue him. I'm sure he prayed for him. He cried his eyes out. Yeah. But as soon as he saw his son on the horizon, dude, he took off sprinting at him, And it's also, it's a picture of our Heavenly Father. He does pursue you. But at some point, we have to repent and return.
Yeah.
And when we do, it's always open arms.
Always, yeah.
Always.
There's always a place back at the Father's house if you'll come to your senses and come home where God is and where your family is.
You're right. And
so I guess for parents or family members, you've got somebody that you care about that's suffering from the disease of addiction. When I think about that prodigal son story, and we talk a lot about in our groups about the rock bottom, and for a lot of people, and I thought about it today, when you've kind of burnt some brain cells, and when you have changed the pathways of your brain, the neurotransmitters and the neuroplasticity, when you've altered some of that, I think it takes a rock bottom of a life-changing experience just to cut through that, to shake you to your senses, and to also cut through this delusion that you live in, that you're just going to continue to keep using or drinking and boozing, and no matter how bad life gets, you're never going to give that up, and like you hold on to that.
Yeah, that's your thing. And the thing about addiction and drugs and alcohol, for me, like it's tangible. Like if I'm stressed out or if I'm feeling some type of way, that's one thing I could go to, and it was tangible. I could get my hands on it. And I say this as a born again Christian because I've struggled a lot of times without having a God that I can see. Yeah. I don't mean to be blasphemous. I'm just being honest. I've come to terms with it now, but that's just faith. Yeah. Faith. But it was something that I knew I had, and like what really started my cycle was at Wagner. Like I worked at Wagner, and it was an intellectual job, very difficult job. And I didn't feel confident that I could do it. So I was like, I need some some focus. Mm-hmm. Terrible decision. You just don't know where that rock bottom will end up. And mine was I lost my job. Mm-hmm. And this most recent time at treatment, so where I work now, they hired me. I'd worked there before. They rehired me, knowing that I'd beat addiction. Mm-hmm. So I talked to my boss, the boss's boss. When I went in for the first interview, I said, listen, I'm good, man. Relapse had never entered my mind. There was nothing in the world that could make me relapse, period. And I was like, listen, dude, if I ever have an issue, I'll come talk to you man to man. Well, guess what I didn't do? I didn't go talk to him man to man when I relapsed, But he found out about it. And that was, knowing that you disappoint this guy that really put some faith in you to bring you back, it sucks. Mm-hmm. It does suck. So for me, that was the secondary rock bottom. I didn't necessarily lose my job that time, but one of the men that showed faith to said, hey, I believe in you. I threw it out the window. And that's another thing that addicts do that doesn't make sense. An honorable man would want to prove to this person that, you hired me and it was the right decision. Mm-hmm. But you let a few things happen and you abandon the scriptures, you're going to go back to what you knew.
Yeah. Addicts will, I think, without meaning to, burn a lot of bridges. And it's just that the drugs or alcohol means more
That's your God.
than hurting people that care about you and that you care about. You don't mean anything by it, but at the same time, nothing's going to stand in the way
Nothing.
of the drugs and alcohol. Nothing.
Nothing. I would have my wife left, I would say bye. You know what I mean? That's the. I don't know what I would do without her now. It's crazy, but at the time, it would have been a no-brainer. No-brainer. I just thank God that rock bottoms exist, and it shakes you.
Yeah.
And at least you have the opportunity. There are some people I think hit rock bottom and they don't care. You know, they just keep on trucking. Those people don't make it. But I just thank God that for us, we had that. We had that. We probably had people praying for us. We had probably that loved us,
No
that
doubt.
were maybe not trying to, get to us, but were praying. And I know my mom would pray. My mom's prayer for her addict son was, Jesus, save his life. I don't care what happens to him. Like, I'm talking about death. Kill him if you have to, but save his soul. That was my mom's prayer, and has been my mom's prayer for a while. I thank God I'm not, I thank God that he's gracious and he gives us a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would
He's gracious.
I think that would be the encouragement to people. If you have a friend or loved one that's suffering from drug or alcohol addiction, is that when their life is going terribly and they're losing a lot of important stuff to them, be almost kind of optimistic, because if they hit rock bottom hard enough, then it creates a window of opportunity, desperation, as we call it in the group. They find this desperation to make a change, and they've got a little window where they can make a conscious, sound decision to change their life for the better. So I don't know if you want to pray for a rock bottom. I don't know if you want to use those words, but definitely keep praying for them, and definitely keep your eyes out for those opportunities to maybe speak a little life into their life. But when they fall on misfortune, and when it's continual disaster after disaster, keep, like the prodigal son's dad, just keep watching out that, with faith, just keep watching out that door and keep watching out that window and just keep calling them home. You can do that. You can call them home with your prayers. You can call them in. You can call those things that be not as though they were. You just call them home. You call them saved. You call them healed and delivered. And I believe it happened.
I know.
Yeah.
But of course, I cry a lot though, like a ton, dude. Cry.
Yeah, that's okay. I still do that when I do those meetings, and it comes time to share, or maybe one of those 1 year chips. I just kind of lose it.
What if the chips? We were involved with Celebrate Recovery for about 3 years, and great time. I would recommend it for sure. I guess the red flag there is the lack of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and it's not always born again people there. Like, it's open to anybody. So for a born again Christian new to sobriety, you do need a network, man. But you make sure your network is biblical based. You find some men of God around you that speak the truth of the Word of God into your life. But at the same time, you need to be around people that have done exactly what you've done. And normally it's not those men of God. But you need to hear the stories of your peers that have struggled through addiction. You need to hear their stories, and you need to tell your story, because people need to hear it.
Yeah, those groups are life changing. Without that, without the AA group, I had zero chance in hell of changing.
No, you have to have a community.
For me, it's what made all the difference in the world. I had just started to go back to church, and then I hit my rock bottom, and then the very next day I was not court ordered, but family ordered to go to this meeting.
You had intervention.
or else. And so I enjoyed the meetings because it was in a church setting. You've got church people there that are dealing with addictions, and everybody, for me, everybody's just trying to we're going to soft shoe around these things, because it's a group of Christians, and we got to kind of clean up the delivery of it and the sharing of it. And it's embarrassing, and that may be your home church. With this group, these aren't people you'll never see. You don't run around this group.
Right, that's a good point.
And some of them, are a little rough around the edges, but their stories of being addicted and getting free and how they're dealing with it was so uncensored that, for me, that's what I needed to hear.
The raw truth.
And I needed that. I needed no more. For me, I didn't need any. Church was, I said it like this: I can get at church what I can't get at Alcoholics Anonymous. And I get at Alcoholics Anonymous what I may not get at church. And so when I mix the two together, For me, it was a super winning combination. They're very different. They're
They
not
are.
the same. They're
They
they're
are.
never supposed to be the same. Each is amazing in its own right.
Well, so the church in America is off, anyways. In my opinion, for a lot. I just have to be careful what I say, but you may not always find the authenticity you need at church. All right, I promise you. But Alcoholics Anonymous, those people have nothing to hide. They're lucky to be alive. I mean, seriously, they are just raw and they're real. Where at the church, they're guarded and they're superficial a lot of times.
Yeah, I think both of them are so important. And even Alcoholics Anonymous, it is not a religious group. Yet one of the keys to getting free is finding your higher power. Whoever that is, there's a higher power for everyone that you need to plug into if you're going to make it.
Mm-hmm. True. So you've got the psychological or the medical community's description of addiction, which I don't think that's wholeheartedly off. Of course, I'll come back to the Bible and say that it's sin 100%, but people that don't necessarily prescribe to the Bible or are not born again believers, they have to study behavior and describe it the best that they know how, apart from Christ,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they do. I don't think it's terrible information at all. I think it's good information to supplement us with. But I like to think back in the Garden of Eden. God gave Adam and Eve this entire garden, and it was all good, right?
Yeah.
Except he had one instruction, right? So the knowledge, or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't eat it, because when you do, you will surely die. And so God put that tree there in the Garden of Eden, but said, hey, can't mess with it. We all know what happens if you don't take a look at it. It's Genesis 3. But they were deceived, and they took the apple and they ate it. And so what I like to equate that to are people that smoke marijuana. And they say, well, God put this here for me. Yeah, maybe God put that here, but you could look at marijuana, LSD, psilocybin, DMT. All these stuff are natural occurring substances. But we have clear instruction through the Bible that you need to be sober for the purpose of prayer. You know what I mean? You have to be sober-minded. We're not to at any point be off. And I'm not saying that to say I never do it. You know what I mean? Or even at the times when I was in addiction, I even kind of thought I knew this, but I mean, I told myself it's okay to smoke marijuana because I'm not on pills,
Yeah.
It's okay. It's the better one. But, I think God himself put in my spirit, hey, I also put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden. And the thing is, I've done a lot of psychedelics, and there's a lot of psychedelic treatments for addiction that are effective, very effective, but evil, because they run contrary to the word of God. So if I were to go to Costa Rica on a ayahuasca trip, to try to get rid of my demons, I'm going to see things that I should have.
And I've heard a few of those stories from people online that have had that experience.
Yeah, and I was really, before I went to treatment earlier this year, that was my plan. I'm like, I'm going to go do this. Like I want to freaking see what's in there, what is in there. And first it's kind of cost inhibitive. It's about $2,000, So, but then I was like, I've been to treatment before, and it worked well for a while, and then I relapsed. They call it in treatment episode 2. It's like different episodes. But I was like, man, I want to see what these psychedelics do. But God stopped it, and that's the reason. I'm not putting that on you, saying, hey, that's the way it's got to be. I'm just saying that's the way God explained it. That's the way God explained it to me, to say, do not go on a psychedelic trip. So, and marijuana is psychoactive.
Good stuff. Yeah, I've heard some of those stories online of some of those guys that have done that, and they've got some really awesome results. Yeah. But inside here, I'm like, I would never want to do that.
Oh, I still want to go do it. Like DMT, dude. I mean, that's really. I mean, that's been my goal for a long time. But I mean, I'm not. But yeah, I would love to see it. Love to see what's out there. So, like we talked about this before, but at treatment they said there are only three outs. If you don't beat addiction, or if you're not delivered from addiction, if you don't find another way, there's only 3 things: it's death, jail, or institution. There's no other option, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, it's really, that's what it boils down to. And this most recent, I went to Focus Treatment Center in Chattanooga, and the first place I went was biblical, and the second place was secular. So it was really cool to see the difference. And I would go biblical-based rehab or a ministry if I were you, but the cool thing about Focus is that they do have psychological observations, and they have a secular approach to sobriety. And I'm not saying it's bad at all. One of the greatest things is assertive language, and that is basically like, hey, when you do that, it makes me feel like this. going forward, can we do this? Just bring things to conversation. And the reason I bring that up is because as an addict, like you mentioned earlier, you're going to destroy a ton of relationships. So then at some point, you got to try to start working to rebuild them. And some people are going to forgive you like that. They're going to forgive you, no question. Some people are not. And I read a book about Adam Brown. The name of the book is Fearless, and he was a crackhead, and parents didn't know what to do with him. He met a girl, he got good, relapsed a ton, and but this dude ended up becoming a Navy SEAL, a DevGru Navy SEAL.
Oh wow!
And he beat addiction and became the most elite warrior on the face of the planet. And he's a born again Christian. Fearless is the name of the book. It's a great book. Cry my eyes out.
What's his name again?
Fearless. His name is Adam Brown.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll definitely check it out.
It's a freaking tearjerker.
It's one of them.
Is it 4 or 5? What's the first one? My Life.
The first one, yeah. The first one is the one for me that's just burned in my mind. I mean, those others I know, maybe not in the order. I don't have them all memorized, but I can name some of them. But I'll tell you what comes first. And the first one to me is like, I think I'm still on step one.
Yeah,
I think I'll always be on step one,
right?
Because it says basically that you came to yourself, like the Bible verse says, like you came to a realization that your life is completely unmanageable because of drugs and alcohol.
And it's been like that for a while. Like for me, it'd been unmanageable for years, but I didn't know that. I feel like everybody else, and I would say you probably know people in your own life right now, and you think, you touched on it the last time we talked, man, there's something weird about that person. Like there's something up. A lot of times it's probably an addiction of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it manifests in ways that don't make sense to other people. Like it just doesn't add up.
Right. Yeah, but just keep optimistic with them, and hopefully they will experience something that gives them that break of thought and allows them to make some very good decisions to get help. And if you're struggling with anything, just know that we're rooting for you. We are cheering you on wherever you are at.
Reach out.
Drop us a message.
Reach out, man. Talk to somebody.
We would love to hear what you're going through in your story, maybe exchange some hope with each other. And we would look forward to that very much.
Absolutely.
And so, man, thanks for coming back.
Heck yeah.
You're a busy guy, and I know you've got to get out soon.
I'm going to make some poison. I'm about to poison America, for literally.
But thanks for tuning in again, and keep liking, keep sharing, keep subscribing, all that great stuff. Thanks, and talk to you soon.
And drop us a freaking funny story.
Yeah, do that.
Drop us a funny
story. We get a few of those requests. We'll take requests. See you guys on the next time.